this Friday is International Women's Day, and it's also the release date for a new movie that tells the incredible story of the Italian-American saint, Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini. Our guest this evening is Rod Barr, screenwriter for the film Cabrini, which opens Friday. He's best known for co-writing the recent hit film Sound of Freedom, one of the highest-grossing independent movies of the last decade. He's sold numerous original scripts and adapted a wide variety of books and true-life stories for top production companies. He began his career writing young adult novels, spent a decade creating video games, but then returned to his true love, screenwriting. Cabrini is the latest film from Angel Studios and stars Cristiana Dell'Anna, David Morse, and John Lithgow. The new film Cabrini opens in theaters this Friday, March 8th. Welcome to the Busted Halo Show, screenwriter Rod Barr.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Father.
Oh, I mean, I've been seeing word of this movie for quite a while. There's been some great PR, great public relations, and not just in Catholic circles. We got some big stars, as people heard in the trailer there. But maybe first, Rod, let's back up a little bit and just, obviously many of our listeners would be somewhat to moderately familiar with the life of Mother Cabrini. But for those who may not be, just to give us a little bit of her story.
Well, she is the first American saint. She was born in Italy in 1850 and came to America in 1889 to serve Italian immigrants in New York, specifically Five Points, which was a desperately poor part of New York, slums, really tenement, terrible living conditions. And the Italians at that time, and this is hard for many Americans to sort of picture, but they really were lowest class citizens, often considered barely better than animals, strictly cheap labor was basically what they were considered. It's difficult for us to imagine that now with Italians, but at the time it was absolutely true. So she came as a woman into a man's world, and she came as an Italian in a world that really was not very welcoming to Italians. So she had a lot of the deck was stacked against her, to say the least. And she went on to found one of the greatest entrepreneurial empires that the world had ever seen, equal of Vanderbilt and Rockefeller.
Wow.
But she did it for others, not for profit as those gentlemen did. So it was quite a different thing. But she was an astonishingly good businesswoman of her time, and really for any time.
Right. And these days, we would, like you said, it's hard for us to imagine Italians being so discriminated against. It's maybe even a little hard for certain younger people to imagine a time when women just didn't do these things. And we hear a lot, even captured some of it in the trailer. John Lithgow plays the mayor of New York. David Morse, people would recognize him from a lot of things. I remember from back in the days, St. Elsewhere, when he was on that hospital show.
Yeah.
But he plays the Archbishop of New York. But I mean, everybody was telling her, don't do this, don't rock the boat, but also like go home. Like the Bishop of New York said, go back to Italy. Like, we don't want you here. I mean, can you imagine that?
Yeah, no, deeply inconvenient for the Irish American Archbishop of New York that this little Italian woman showed up and said, "No, we have to treat these Italians with dignity, and I'm going to do it, and you should help me, sir, or Your Holiness, whatever the correct nomenclature is." But it was inconvenient for a few reasons. One of which was the Irish had just come across themselves. They were just a generation in America. And they had just barely made it into being considered American and not something else, foreign or Irish.
Which, to be fair, even a generation before that, they were suffering the same sort of prejudice.
100%.
I mean, one of my favorite Scorsese films is Gangs of New York. And that's when, like, the Irish and the Catholics were considered, again, as you're saying, like scum of the earth or no better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so once there was a little bit of toehold in American society, here come the Italians reminding the Americans that they were all part of this, quote, foreign church called the Catholic Church, and that they were brothers and sisters in this church, which was deeply inconvenient for the very Irish, Archbishop. But he was fundamentally a pastor and a good man. And eventually he was sort of brought around to Cabrini's point of view. But took a while, and he was dead set against her at the beginning.
Well, the movie we're talking about is Cabrini, and it opens in theaters this Friday. And theaters, I mean, You got Dune on a couple of screens. You can have Cabrini on another couple of screens. That's pretty
Yeah.
impressive. Tell us a little bit about sort of the movie making piece of this. Is this something that because we don't see a lot of it? We see certainly movies about Catholic saints, but not very often. A, with this kind of high production value, and B, with this sort of Hollywood star power. What made this kind of take hold? I guess.
Well, that's a great question. I think the easy answer is Eustace Wolfington, who is the executive producer, and he's a man of deep faith, and somebody who and deep pockets. I add, because these are expensive propositions.
Sure.
These
Sure.
movies, and he
Yeah.
had a very personal commitment to and devotion to Mother Cabrini, because
Oh.
he is an amazing businessman and took her on as his patron saint because he also desired to be an amazing businessman, which he eventually did become under her influence. And so he wanted to do it right. He had been asked to do a movie that uh, on Cabrini that he saw. I guess he read the script, and he said, "No, please, you can't do that to Mother Cabrini." They were going to do a sort of a very, very pious, very, very
Right.
saintly, very
Right.
quiet, very demure, very obedient movie. And he said, "No, you can't do that to Cabrini. She was a powerhouse.
Yeah.
She was a disruptor. Of
Yeah.
course, she was pious. Of course, she was all those things. But you can't forget her energy, her drive, her business acumen. I mean, these are things that, by the way, I think make better movies. And
Right.
so, um, I
Right.
mean, I'm a big fan of piety, but it's hard to portray it exactly right on the screen without being a little, we wanted to make this, as you I think suggested, a movie for everyone. It is
Mm.
absolutely a movie for Catholics. Catholics will understand everything. They'll feel very at home in this movie. But we've screened it enough to general audiences to know that Protestants of every stripe feel just as strongly about it. Atheists, agnostics,
Mm.
uh, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, every kind of person has seen this movie and finds something beautiful in it. Of course,
Wow.
Catholics will understand it
Yeah.
um, with more intimacy, but in that sense, I think we hope it's a Gandhi-like movie where Gandhi was a man of faith, but the
Right.
Hinduism didn't get in the way. We all understood where his heart was,
Right.
and if you're a Hindu, I bet you understood more of it. But,
Right. Well, that's true.
but
Yeah.
we really do get, and that was our hope, and that's why I think I'd say those were our marching orders, was to
Mm.
make a movie that could come out in 3,000 theaters and really bring general audiences to a movie about the first American saint, which is something um, that I would be very grateful if that
Yeah.
happened.
And it is opening on 3,000
It
screens
is indeed.
this coming
It is
Friday.
indeed.
The movie we're talking about is Cabrini. We're speaking with Rod Barr. He's a producer and screenwriter of the film. I would imagine that maybe there's a lot on your shoulders as a writer. For any person who's been canonized, like whoa, but also particularly given the challenge that you were talking about. Well, I mean, there's a lot of religious movies made where everybody just seems, almost like Godspell and Jesus. He's just sort of
Yeah.
happy, and he's the
Yeah.
buddy clown and all that. And
Yeah.
and we know that Jesus. And then you got like a Mel Gibson doing, wow, that's a very intense, earthy Jesus.
Yeah.
But I would certainly imagine that you're trying to strike that balance between, well, let's portray her not just as someone who's praying all the time, but as a shrewd businesswoman who has to go toe to toe with men in a glass ceiling world that, this is a
Mhm.
century before any of that had been broken.
Mhm.
So for you, did that feel like a challenge? Did you feel like you were walking a tightrope there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a difficult balance to strike, but in this case, I think it was sort of made easier by the fact that what she did was so dynamic
Mm,
in action. I mean, the actual things that she did, as you
right,
say, toe to toe with the men and it wasn't a glass ceiling; it was a stone ceiling. There was no
right,
way to see. There was no way for her to get through that.
right.
So, she's the ultimate underdog, and an underdog story is a great story. She's Rocky. Nobody believes that she should be able to do what she does. And when you have someone who's driven by faith, because her engine was 100% faith and
Yeah,
love,
yeah,
100%. Every one of those actions, I believe, in the movie becomes imbued in a very subtle way with that faith, with that love. So, in the end, I don't think you have to show. I would say this: in the end, her action, her life is a prayer. Her
mm,
action, her life is faith and demonstration. It's absolutely clear. If every atheist that's seen this knows what her engine is. No one's
Right.
doubting. It's faith,
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
And the actions are driven by that. But the actions themselves, because they're so oh, because she's such an underdog, that there is sort of this, you end up cheering for her. Go
Yeah.
for it, do it. But you know what drives her, and I think that's how we struck the balance that you mentioned there.
Well, you refer to her as a superhero and a powerhouse.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
a small, I mean, it's from what I've seen, Cristiana Dell'Anna, who plays Mother Cabrini, she's got the right stature, but almost feisty, kind of like you imagine Mother Teresa in a similar way. She was
Yeah.
small in stature, but boy, she could make world leaders turn on a dime.
That's exactly right. She had that charisma, and you can't teach that. You can't. I mean, first of all, Christiana has it on screen as an
Oh yeah,
actor,
yeah,
which is something you can't possibly teach because um, you either can't take your eyes off someone on the screen or you can. And those few that have that, it's unteachable and it's sort of an amazing thing. And she has
mm,
that quality that you have to
mm,
look at her. But so did Cabrini, and
right,
she had that charisma, and that charisma was born of determination, and it was born of faith. She and I think she considered herself, she was a mother, Mother Cabrini, and like any mother, when somebody got between her and her children, watch out. It didn't
mm,
matter who you were. It didn't matter if you were the Archbishop of New York. It
right,
didn't matter whether you were a cardinal in the Vatican. And in Mother Cabrini's case, her children were all immigrants.
yeah,
They began with Italian immigrants, but it eventually became Polish, Jewish, any kind of immigrant very quickly became part of her family, where they became her children. So she was just an absolute powerhouse. But I think it's driven by that fierce maternal love.
yeah. And initially founded orphanages. Her legacy today, how would you describe that? If people are looking around, whether it's Catholics or people who live in New York or people who are in the social service industry. I mean, there are things that she established that we kind of take for granted today.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting. Some of the words, some of the terminology is not quite up to date. Like orphanages. I'm sure there are orphanages around, but you don't hear
Right,
about them as much as you
right,
used to, right?
right,
And orphans today, we would call homeless youth. That's who
right,
they were. They were homeless youth,
right.
and they lived on the street, and they were at risk of being um, trafficked. That's how we would say it today, and that's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
happened. And that's actually one of the characters in the movie is a young girl named Victoria who undergoes that very trajectory, and then Mother Cabrini finds her, takes her under her wing, and it's a beautiful subplot. But many of the and of course the immigration issue is one that is incredibly present today, still very very contentious, still very very. I mean, it's probably the most contentious issue in
sure,
American life right
sure,
now.
sure. Yeah.
And so the issues that she dealt with and the institutions she founded are still very, very relevant today.
And we are still, maybe even more, in a polarized world, a fairly prejudiced world.
Mhm.
But it's just amazing. I mean, even just the snapshot that you described, that we have a very short memory. I mean, they always say about history. I hang out with Cardinal Dolan sometimes, and he's an American church historian. So historians always say, if we don't study history or remember history, we're condemned to repeat it.
Yeah.
And the same thing keeps happening over and over again. Whoever is the new group who wants to come here, or even other countries, we saw this in Europe over the last several years, that suddenly it's like we are completely have amnesia about the fact that, wait, that was us. We
That
weren't
was us.
centuries ago. The Irish and the
100%.
Italians and the Polish were not born in the United States.
No, 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 no. It's so true. And the one thing there's a couple things I would remind people about this issue.
Hmm.
One is that Mother Cabrini is the patron saint of the immigrant,
Huh.
not the patron saint of immigration.
Right.
Immigration is a policy
Right.
issue. It's a contentious political issue.
Yep. Yep.
Mother Cabrini was always focused on the human being. The immigrant is always a human being
Mm.
first.
Hmm.
Now, also, laws were completely different in 1890 than they are today. So
Right.
I don't believe that Mother Cabrini can speak to us, can shout
Right.
to us from
Right.
1889 about what border policy should be in
Sure.
2024. It just isn't. Uh, they're not relevant. I mean, they don't compare to each other.
Right.
But what she can do is say, well, our job certainly as Catholics, Christians, and I would argue as human beings, is to look at people first through the lens of dignity, first through the lens of love. If we do that first, I mean, and as Christians, we're frankly obliged to, but
Yeah.
if we do, then I do believe we will create better policy out of that. I don't know if I can't tell you what it'll be, but we actually do agree, right, left, and
Right.
center,
Right.
on certain transcendent values that she
Mhm.
espouses: dignity, love, hope, determination. These things in our divided nation, we actually and absolutely agree on because they are transcendent human values. And I think the movie's largely about those values.
Producer and screenwriter of the new movie Cabrini, Rod Barr, is our guest here on the Busted Halo Show. You can go see it. You just pick up your Fandango app. It's not like, oh, where do I stream it, or is there a screening for my church? This is out in movie theaters this coming Friday, March 8th, premiere. So, and if a lot of people go, this is how it works these days. If enough people go see it this weekend, hey, they keep it. They keep it in the theater, and then that means other people get to see it. So
That's exactly
we
how it works.
recommend,
That's exactly
and we
how it works.
appreciate the not only, I would say certainly the work you put in, but it also, from what I hear, is that it sounds like Mother Cabrini touched a little bit of you, and you're able to share that with the rest of the world.
Oh, she touched me quite a bit, and she touched everyone in the movie. It was a really amazing set to be on. I've been on a few, and this one was different because everybody
Oh,
had read the script, and
right.
everybody was pulling for the movie in a way that was, I think, imbued with something a little deeper than the normal movie. And
Mhm.
I think that's 100% Cabrini. You know, because she said the world is too small for what I intend to do, but she didn't say the world is too small for what I intend to do while I'm alive.
Right, right.
You can work from heaven. So,
She is. She
and I
is.
think she has been.
Well, thank you, Rod, for your time today. We'll put a link on our radio blog so we can look up some showtimes if you like in a theater near you. Opens Friday. Theaters nationwide. The new film is Cabrini.